Good evening. Hello. Welcome to the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. I am delighted that you could all be here this evening. And I should explain that tonight we're normally in the library, but tonight we're in a very special room. It's the assembly room. It's for our membership. This room has been used by the General Society members once a month since 1899. So you are honored to be in here tonight in this special space. So very much welcome. For those of you who are not familiar with the General Society was founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of the city and founded by, in particular, 22 artisans. The 228-year-old organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life of the people of New York City. And it does that in three particular ways. We have Mechanics Institute, a free trade school. We have this lecture series. And we have our wonderful library downstairs, which I hope you will revisit on another occasion. I would like to acknowledge, on behalf of the General Society, that this program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Tonight's lecture continues that distinguished tradition of lectures. The lecture series has actually been going for over 100 years, and this is the second of 5 labor lectures that will provide a behind-the-scenes look at the creative industries in New York City. Focusing on the talented artists that deliver the heartbeat of the creative arts. We've been fortunate enough to partnership with United Scenic Artists 829 and to introduce our speaker, Tracy Christensen. We're very fortunate to have Cecilia Fredericks. And Cecilia is the national business agent for the United Scenic Artists 829, and also very interestingly, she is also a costume designer herself. She has been in that position at the United Scenic Artists since 2010. I'd also like to mention Beverly Miller, who has created this series. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Cecilia Fredericks.
Thank you, Karen. As Karen mentioned, I'm the National Business Agent for United Scenic Artists. We are a labor organization, a union, that represents scenery, costume, lighting, sound, projection designers for live theater, as well as production designers, art directors, costume designers, and art department coordinators in motion pictures and television. We're not quite as old as the society, the Mechanics Society, but we are about 120 years old, and we started basically representing scenic artists, people who painted scenery. When we began, there was no such thing as a theatrical designer. As the craft of theater design developed, we then began to represent scenic designers, and then in the 1920s, we started to represent costume designers as that skill was elevated to an art form. And in fact, the first female member of United Scenic Artists was a famous costume designer named Aileen Bernstein. Today, there are about 4,000 members of United Scenic Artists across America, and we also have several hundred members residing in Europe, and about a quarter of those members are costume designers. And tonight, one of the best and brightest of those is going to speak to you and tell you a little bit about what it is that she does in her work life. She has been a costume designer for Broadway and off-Broadway shows, including the show Souvenir, and you may have seen her work recently on television on PBS, the concert presentation of Sweeney Todd live from Lincoln Center. She has also done a lot of regional theater work, and she has done work as an associate designer on Broadway on shows as diverse as The Little Mermaid and 12 Angry Men, and most recently, a show called Mackinac. She has received various theater awards in LA and in New York. She has a master's degree in design from Rutgers University, and she serves as a board member for United Scenic Artists. So she's a very busy person. And without further ado, I introduce to you Tracy Christensen.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here tonight and share with you some of what I do, living the privilege of being a professional costume designer. Some of you may not know what that means. Some of you may think that sounds like a fake job or some kind of super glamorous job. And some of you may be thinking, that's all great, but I don't get what that has to do with me. Well, unless you've been living in some kind of a media-free cave and you don't read magazines or turn on the television or anything, chances are good that costume design actually touches and affects you every day. Every time you see a person or people on stage, on screen in a film, on TV, in a show or a commercial, in a magazine print ad, on the red carpet, in the circus, anywhere people are performing or being used in a public service way, costume designers have been at work. Our primary function as costume designers is storytelling. It's our job to give the viewer or the audience all the information required for them to make an evaluation of what they're looking at and what's going on. Human beings have an automatic response system. I think of it as our default setting, which is that we judge people by how they look. You've been doing it for the last 1 minute since I got up here, which is fine, it's good. I'm counting on that when I do my job. My job is to present you with as much visual stimulation as I possibly can to give you what you need to know, whether it's about Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman or some woman in a magazine cleaning her toilet with a product. You know, there's clothing speaks before the person speaks, sometimes instead of a person speaking. And so it's a very important and crucial piece of the information lineup as we try to support whatever the piece is that we're designing. So costume design actually appears all around you all the time, and you just maybe aren't that aware of it. I started my journey in snowy southeastern Wisconsin, and I grew up in a very rural setting with very blue-collar parents. I didn't really know anything about the world of the arts, but my mother made a huge effort for my sisters and I to learn how to read music, how to play instruments, how to be exposed to the arts. And somewhere along the line, I became aware that there was such a thing as theater. I have this sort of fascination with how people find their way to the thing that they're meant to do in this life. And I always wonder if I'm really amazing at something that I've just never tried, you know? Like maybe I'm a really great golfer and we'll just never know because I've never done it, you know? But once I got into junior high and high school, the only real opportunity to participate was to perform. And so that's what I was doing and discovering that I had an affinity for this art form. And by the time I was getting ready to think about college, I pretty much knew that this field was for me. I just didn't know where I fit in. I mean, for the good of the world, it was not going to be in acting. I didn't want to like make anybody deal with that, and I wasn't really that compelled to do it. But I just didn't know what there was, what was available. And just sort of by coincidence, because I didn't really have much guidance, my parents were not college educated and didn't really know what I was doing anyway. I was just kind of looking at state schools and you know, different schools that had theater programs and just kind of naively thinking that anything was fine. When my high school drama teacher, Mr. Bodie, came up to me one day and said, "What are you doing after you graduate?" And I said, "Well, I think I want to go into the theater." And he said, "Well, you should look at Northwestern. They have a really good undergraduate program." And I thought, oh, okay, I'll go there. And like no concept whatsoever of what this private university was about and how what the academic standards were or anything. I just sent away for the application, filled it out, and sent in my $25 or whatever, and sent it away. And pretty soon I got this huge white envelope in the mail that said, "Congratulations, and here's your financial aid package." And so I went. And I remember the first semester we had this theater and context class where there was a huge lecture to all of us, and then later in the week we broke out into discussion sections, smaller groups that were led by graduate students. So I sat through some big fat lecture about, Oedipus Rex or something, and then later in the week I was in this discussion section, and there were kids at Northwestern who had famous parents, who had already worked professionally, traveled and lived in Europe. I mean, these were, this was a league of people that I had never met before. And this conversation started about the lecture that we had listened to. And I had never heard people talk this way. No one had ever talked around me or to me in this way. And I'll never be able to forget this moment when my brain sort of like cracked open and I got that this was the start of the rest of my life, that this was the right place for me. I understood what was being said. So then I kind of, dinked around and did the program and whatever until finally, by hook or by crook, I found my way to the costume shop in one of my crew assignments. And it was the first crew assignment I had where I actually got what was going on. It suddenly made sense. And I got what everybody was talking about. I understood what was being done in there. And I realized I had found it. I found the thing that was for me. So I pursued that for the rest of my undergraduate years. And then, just like Mr. Bodie, Virgil Johnson appeared. And he took over our program my senior year and immediately pegged my colleague Dan and I and was like, "What are you guys doing? What are you doing after this?" And I said, "I don't know. I guess I'm going to start doing costume design." He's like, "Okay, let's come into my office." So he came in and talked to us about grad school and all that kind of stuff. And the next thing I knew, I was going through the process of finding a graduate program because I really didn't have enough education to just go out and start. And that's how I found my way to Rutgers, which is where I did my master's program, which was 3 years of additional work. So it's funny now looking back on it, and if you're God-fearing, you could imagine like God's hand on my head going like, "Go here, go there," because I was so ignorant and naive. And if you don't believe in that, then I guess it's just my destiny that I got where I needed to go. So while I was at Rutgers, I met some people who started hooking me up with people that they knew in New York, and I started working various jobs during the summers and stuff like that. And I met a designer who eventually became my mentor. And as soon as I graduated, I started to work for her pretty regularly. Her name is Ann Holdward. And her work in the musical theater was so much of what I wanted to learn, because that's your function when you first get out of school, is just who can I work for and what can I learn from them? And how many people can I do this with in the shortest amount of time? I just want to learn and be a big sponge and just get it all, And then she kind of took me on, and while I was working for her, early in my very first few years, she was hired for a new project that was something that no one in New York had ever seen before, which was a Broadway musical based on an animated feature and produced by a corporation. And it was called Beauty and the Beast. And I was just sort of there and got the job working as one of the assistants. I was so unqualified, it's not even funny. And I just was like, in the right place at the right time again, and ended up working on this remarkable project from the very beginning. I was just sort of second assistant from the left. I was not the boss of it. but I learned so much on that project. And when we completed it, of course, it was this gigantic worldwide hit, and everybody wanted to do it. And just at that moment, the person who had been the boss of it, who had been the associate, he had to excuse himself from the project. He was not able to carry on. And so by default, I became the boss of it, again, totally unqualified, and just started going to foreign countries and setting up this musical everywhere around the world that people were licensing this production. So I sort of fast-tracked right out of school just by, again, destiny, to the job that crafted me into a very respected associate costume designer, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but also the designer that I became, because you take from all these different sources to craft your style and your approach to things, and then you have your innate response as well. So I did a whole bunch of associate work for a lot of years, and being an associate means you're the top level assistant. You work hand in hand with the designer to create the actual design, and then you're in charge of how everything happens, from who's going to make it and how it fits in the budget. You're the liaison to the producer, you manage the schedule. You handle everything that gets the costumes from somebody's head to the stage, and then you make sure that it looks that way until the show closes. You are accountable. So you can imagine what a responsibility that turns out to be on a show like Beauty and the Beast, or some of the other really big musicals that I became privileged enough to be the associate on, which were a lot for Disney. I did The Little Mermaid. The last associate job that I did of a big Broadway musical was Shrek for DreamWorks. It seemed like I was sort of put in the position of always doing the shows where people were not just wearing like beautiful frocks and suits and stuff. I was always doing the ones where people were like sea witches and teapots and crazy mermaids and stuff. But that actually led me to a very interesting design career, which started while I was still working as an associate. I started hedging out on my own and doing design work, and then around 2007 or 2008, I started to make the decision that I didn't want to do design associate work any longer. It had just come to a place of closure for me, and I was just, nothing was bad or wrong, I was just done. So for the last few years, I've been kind of reinventing myself in the industry for the people who only knew me one way, and building myself up as a full-time designer. So I've just put my website up on the screen. I'm not cool enough to do like a PowerPoint presentation or anything like that, but this is, okay, that didn't work. Okay. I have my website broken out into different types of things that I've designed, and this is a Broadway show that I did a couple of years ago called Souvenir. It's based on the life of Florence Foster Jenkins, which some of you may know who she was. She was a wealthy socialite widow in New York in the 30s who decided in her later life to be a concert soprano. And she was really, really, really bad. And gave many concerts for all her famous friends at the Ritz, and became sort of a legend, and then ultimately gave a huge concert at Carnegie Hall in the 40s when she was in her 70s. And she always wore these really outrageous costumes for the different songs that she sang. So for me, as a designer approaching a play about her life, it was just a gold mine. So it was played by the unbelievable, now one of my dearest friends, Judy Kay. She took on the role, which if any of you know of her, you know that her voice is extraordinary, and she had to learn this whole new form of singing, which looked like not singing well. But this was one of the costumes that I designed for this Spanishy song that she sang in her concert. And you can imagine that the real Florence was like 77 or something when she did this concert. So Judy was certainly not quite that old, but the point is that she had no boundaries of foolishness. She just kind of did what she felt was good for the song. Sorry, I'm not doing it right, am I? So anyway, that was that. But this is the picture that you saw when you came in. This was a Shakespeare play that I did where it was what I call when period and modern have a baby. So you want a sort of period flavor, but you also want it to have some kind of modern sensibility. So it's easy for men. Like here's some dude this dude named Richard III, who has cargo pants and boots and then this weird doublet, and we're like, okay, I get what that is. But it's a lot harder with the women, because what does that equal? So I just kind of did like a little runway meets cool fabrics. I don't know. Okay. All right. But so that's some of the stuff that I do in plays, and sometimes I present the work this way, where I do like this particular play was very cinematic. It was actually written by a film and television writer, and you saw these characters move very rapidly through time. This was a play about another play about a true person, Cornelia, who was married to George Wallace, who some of you know as a sort of hideous politician from the 60s. So I designed this as like a series of sketches so we could put them all together and see what the progression of her track was going to look like. This is just one photo from the show, but it's another way of presenting the sketches. So part of what I do is a bunch of research around whatever the show is about, and start to have conversation with the director about what we're doing and the direction it wants to go. Is it realistic? Is it conceptual? Is it fantastical? What's going on? And the more research there is and the more we kind of hone it down, the more I can do drawings that make sense. This was a sketch I did for the Glass Menagerie up in Chautauqua. And some of you, of course, will know this play, that this character lives in the past and just sort of sabotages her family by coming out in this crazy dress from the past. But you're looking to ground the piece in whatever its reality is going to be. This was a Shakespeare play that I did, again, out in like a big field and in a park, and I was trying to come up with really strong silhouettes. Part of that storytelling I was mentioning earlier, of course we use color, but silhouette is a really strong feature that gives you information. And I lean heavily on stuff like that when I'm in a big space. Here we are outside. Who's that guy? Who's that guy? I don't know. Who's that guy? You want to really give strong shapes to people so that we all know, this guy's the king, and this guy's like, who cares? And this guy is important. And, you want to help the people out to understand who it is. So then some of the other things that I've done are in the musical domain, which is, of course, my great passion. This was another concert that I designed a couple of years ago for Lincoln Center. Some of you may have seen it on TV. It was on TV recently. This is a popular form of entertainment these days where the orchestra is on stage. In this case, it's the New York Philharmonic, that little band up on the Upper West Side. And they get a whole bunch of famous people, like these people. There's Patti LuPone, Neil Patrick Harris, Stephen Colbert, Christina Hendricks. And we do like 4 or 5 performances of a fully staged musical. But I can't produce costumes for this show as if it were a show. So I have to come up with a vocabulary, and this is what I just did on that Sweeney Todd that will be out in the fall on PBS, is to come up with a vocabulary that, again, supports the piece and gives you the information you need. All of these clothes I bought off the rack, but ultimately, when people weren't standing in a huge clump like this, they actually looked like they were in the 1970s, because I chose colors and fabrics and things that spoke that to me. If you saw this stuff next to real 70s clothes, it would look totally lame. But in my little world of that night, it worked really well. So you start doing your research and having those conversations and developing what you're doing, and that's when you start doing the sketches. So, for example, this was a musical I did a few years ago called City of Angels, and the conceit of this musical is that there's a man in the 40s who's writing a screenplay of his book, and he's out in Hollywood, and we see this very technicolor world that he's in, but then we also see the chapters of his book being made into this black and white film. So half of the musical is in black and white, and half of it is in color, and it's the same actors going back and forth. So there's a huge challenge to figure out, like, this is that guy we just looked at, he's the guy writing the book, and you discover that his hero in the book is really a version of him. So you have to kind of tie them together again with the silhouette and all that kind of story information so that everybody gets what's happening. And then you have to solve the problem of, in the black and white world, people still have skin and hair, and I'm not doing that whole thing where you paint people's faces white, forget it, because they're going back to the other color thing in 2 seconds. So I had to come up with a palette that actually could include skin tone, which was, and here's the black and white world and color world together. You know, this is a great lighting challenge. But you can see back here even that I kind of used warm tones, like on that trench coat and on that suit, so that our eye just excused the color of skin and didn't fixate on that as not black and white. And it worked really well. So once you get your sketches down, like these are line drawings that I did for another concert at Camelot. This is like step 1 before you develop your color work. And once you have lines and shapes and ideas that everybody's happy with, you start figuring out, well, what are you going to do with the color work? Because to me, color work is the strongest tool that I have to tell a lot of story. So in this particular version of Camelot, all of the fantastical characters were wearing black and red. There's Stacy Keach in a big wig. And here's Fran Drescher being Morgan Le Fay. So I was using color to kind of point the audience towards, these are the fantastical characters, and these are the human characters. So that's again, like the next step after the line drawings. So some of you might be saying, I don't get where costumes come from. And that's an awesome question, because they come from all kinds of places. When you're doing a Broadway show or something very specific, you have them made at fantastic costume houses, costume shops that are secretly all around the city and you just don't know it. And there are also costume artisans who do things like hats and shoes, custom shoes, and all kinds of delightful, specific crafts work, painting of fabric and costumes, distressing, which means to make something look worn or old or dirty, but it's not really. And there's people that just make theatrical jewelry, and people who make wigs, and it's this like astonishing circle of very specified artisans that are just all around you here in New York. So when you're doing something like a Broadway show, you want to build these things because they need to last 8 shows a week, hopefully forever. You know, you're hoping your show will run for a long time. And if somebody's got to sing and dance and act and twirl and fly and tumble and God only knows what all, you have to build costumes that can live up to that. I mean, you know, if I wore this top all week for a month, every single day, it would just poop out. You know, it's not made for that. So you have to construct things that actually can hold up to what the demands of the performers are. Otherwise, in some shows, especially if it's a short run, you can buy things if it's modern or something you could get as vintage. Sometimes you rent costumes. Like for some of these concerts that I do, I rent from all different kinds of places. There's rental houses here, there's rental houses in California. So it just depends on what your project is and what its scope is. here's Patti LuPone being Annie Oakley. This is one of my favorite things. There she is, singing her heart out. This is a concert I did at the Ravinia Festival. So this is, I did a really lovely production of Seussical as a children's tour. And you may remember Seussical from Broadway being this sort of kooky, overblown, overproduced kind of show. It wasn't completely successful. And we went back to it and just said, okay, if I was a kid and I was using my imagination and I was going to be this bird with a really long tail, what would I do? And my idea was I would tie all my clothes together and make a tail out of it. And that was the foundation of the design for that show. So it was just, and I use the word just lightly, children's clothing, but we made it into, like, here's Horton. There's not a single elephant-related thing on this kid, but every child that watched this show completely got that was Horton. He had no tail, he had no ears, he had no trunk, but it was just enough information for them to get that he's this big, ponderous elephant. And it turned out to be this really wonderful, wonderful project. And the writers of the show were really happy with it, which made me feel super great. Okay, then I want to show you some other things that I've done. This is a show I did at SeaWorld in Orlando. And this was a great challenge for me because this show had zero talking. Something at a place like SeaWorld has to be able to be understood by anyone speaking any language. So this was meant to be a show about this girl who has a relationship with a dolphin and a bird and all kinds of, sea creatures. Now, when you're a trainer at SeaWorld, you have to wear this big, thick wetsuit, and it's protecting you from the temperature of the water and from the animals themselves and all kinds of things. But it makes even the smallest women look shapeless. And I had gone to see the current show before we did this, and I was like, what's with all the fat girls? Like, I had seen these women backstage, and they were all slim, and then they all came out in these big, thick wetsuits, and I'm like, okay, we gotta fix that immediately. And so I designed what they call a cover-up, and put the printing and the coloration on it in such a way that it forces your eye to acknowledge that there's a waist, and there's a bust, and there's a body in there, even though it's sheathed in this big, thick neoprene. And of course, she's the lead, and this is a show that's basically aimed, dolphin shows are always aimed at girls, and so she gets to be the pink one. But then there was a guy who represents, he sort of becomes a dolphin. The dolphin becomes a man. And so I was looking at, how are dolphins colorized? Like, how does their body work? And how can I transfer that to a human body? I'm not going to stick a fin on this guy and make him be a dolphin guy, I want to have it be conceptual and that everyone can understand. Then there were all these crazy parameters. This is what he looked like in the show. Come on. Then there was the fact that, it's outside. There's no lighting. So nobody is saying, hey, look over here. I'm doing it all with color. And again, the dynamic design components that I can muster up. Here's all the little dolphins down here. P.S. Dolphins are really big. They look little, but they're actually like super huge. And there were some characters like this girl that represented water. Like, what's that? What do I do with that idea? How do you be water? But that was my assignment. And then there were high diver guys that were tropical birds. And then this girl who was kind of the big featured macaw or whatever you want to call it. Of course, this is like a combo pack of all kinds of tropical birds. It's total nonsense, but it looked good to me. So she's sort of one of the main characters in the show, and she's got a big, huge wingspan, and she flew. And so, of course, here came all my background with all those crazy musicals, because the SeaWorld people were anxious about the fact that there were going to be harnesses and bungee jumpers and all that stuff. And I was like, bring it on. There's no harness I have not seen. So just bring it. I can do it. Design around it. So this was an amazing challenge. I mean, just the outside part and the water part and the animal part and all the rules that go with animals. We can have a separate conversation about SeaWorld and their treatment of animals. I'm happy to speak up about what I witnessed, which was amazing, dedicated devotion to the care and training of these animals. These trainers were such inspiring people to meet. This I will share with you as a one-of-a-kind. I was invited to design a dress made out of chocolate for the New York Chocolate Show a few years ago. And there was a theme to this, and it was being green, which is like the world's dumbest theme. I was hoping for like superheroes or some easy thing. And I'm thinking being green is like, it's not a thing, it's an action. It's a thing that you do. So I was looking at research about composting, and I thought, what if I made this dress where we start with like garbage and then we work our way up, and it shows like the act of being green. So that was all fine and dandy, and I designed, actually there was another design where I had all flowers. I thought that's cool, because this whole thing is about the chocolatiers showing off for each other. This is way not about me, this is about them, And so I brought that in, and they were like, yeah, flowers are really easy, you need to redesign this. And it needs to be something really hard, which ended up being this big bodice of grasses. Whatever, right? So I did that, and this is what it ended up looking like. It was so awesome. And, I think because I was a costume designer, and I understand how to build a foundation for something to live on, because a lot of these chocolatiers were just sticking chocolate on people. I'm like, you guys, this is not gonna last the whole runway. Like, that girl broke that off just getting on the thing. So, you can't just pin something to somebody's head, and it doesn't work. And so I think I sort of lucked out because my experience had supported me well. But that is all chocolate except what she's holding in her hands. So it was just an unbelievable education for me and a really cool collaboration. And my costume, we hardly broke anything. And we put it on display for the whole weekend of the chocolate show. So it was a really cool experience. P.S. Chocolate's really heavy. That girl was like, can I take this off? Okay, so this, I'll kind of like step it up here. This is a really cool ballet that I designed of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Not the goofy, Mickey Mouse one, but the actual fable, the Goethe fable from Germany, which is dark, and the sorcerer is really not nice, and it's kind of spooky. And we decided to make the sorcerer actually, larger than life, and so it ended up being 3 dancers that made up the costume. So there was a girl who was here, and these are her arms, and then there's 2 boys down here who are lifting her, and the whole thing they could run with it and move really fast and be super spooky and scary. And then my favorite thing of all time ever that I've ever designed were the brooms that came to life. And so there was one, and then he chopped her up, and she got thrown behind the, I don't know, whatever that thing was, where we couldn't see, and then all of a sudden, broom arms just started popping up all over because all her little bits became more brooms, and so it turned into tons of girls that looked like this. It was super awesome. But this was how big the sorcerer became. This is kind of like a funky shot. It just sort of looks like the Ghost of Christmas Future or something, but it actually was really cool and really dynamic. And this is all soft except for the part that sticks down here off her arm. It was all painted. This is what I'm talking about, of people that can paint and print and silkscreen and now digitally print practically anything onto fabric. And what I did for SeaWorld was what they call dye sublimation, which is done on polyester fibers. And it's sort of what they do for flags and banners and things that have to be outside in the sun, and it makes it able to hold up to 7 shows a day in the Orlando sunshine, and it worked like a charm. So you can check out my website and see more of this kind of stuff, but that's sort of the range of things that I've been up to, and I think it all started with my love and passion for musical theater and Broadway, and it has grown into a really diverse palette of things. Some are really realistic, and some are kooky and nutty. So it's been an amazing ride, and I feel so honored to live my life as an artist professionally. There's this thing that I tell my students, which is being an artist is not what you do, it's who you are, and it's undeniable, and you cannot do anything else. And if you think you can, you should do that, because this is a really hard life. And we all work freelance. My jobs come to me by who I know and what my relationships are. There's nobody getting me jobs. And having a job right now doesn't mean I'll have a job in a month. So it's a very trepidatious way of making a living. And I've given it a lot of thought more than once in my career. Is this just the dumbest thing anybody's ever done to try to make this a thing? And one time I actually made pro and con lists of like, here's what works for me, and here's what does not work for me about my life in this business. And when I looked at the doesn't work for me, it probably could apply to any job on earth. It's like stress and mean people and stuff like that. Hours, lots of hours. But when I looked at the pro list, it was so specific to my job and the diversity and the variation of what I do all the time, which is multiple jobs simultaneously, many jobs every year, and meeting dozens, hundreds of people, and it's just there's no other job that I could do.
Thank you, Tracy.